Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. I'm so excited to have you joining me today because I have some very exciting news to share with you. My next live class, Pretty Grunge Steampunk Vibes, is now open for registration. The live class will take place on Saturday, May 9th, 2026 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It will be two 2-hour sessions with a 1-hour break in between. You can purchase the class now and join me live, but if you can't make it that day, no worries. You can always catch the replay in the classroom after the live class is complete, and you'll have everything you need to follow along at your own pace. This class is designed for anyone who loves layered, textured, mixed media card making with a grungy, vintage, steampunk industrial edge. Throughout the class, you'll learn 8 techniques, 4 backgrounds, and 4 embellishment combinations, all designed to help you create bold, layered cards with depth, texture, and that signature pretty grunge look. You'll work with water-reactive dye inks, water-reactive dye sprays, texture paste, acrylic paints, stamps, dyes, stencils, and more. I'll be giving you loads of tips and tricks along the way, as well as substitutions so that you can shop your stash. Whether you're new to mixed media card making or a seasoned crafter looking to try some new techniques, there is something for everyone in this class. The goal is to help you build confidence working with multiple mediums, creating layered backgrounds and embellishments, and then bringing them all together for a cohesive look. And to give you a feel for the style and techniques that we'll be exploring in class, in the video today, I'm sharing some background and embellishment techniques that really capture that pretty grunge steampunk aesthetic. These aren't the techniques from the class, so there's plenty more to discover when you join me, but they are a great way to get a sense of the style and get those creative juices flowing. You can find the registration link and all the details in the description box below. I hope to see you there. Now let's get into it. This card, we're going to be working with a variety of stamps and stencils and dies, and I'm going to be using the Tim Holtz numeric from mini set 7 and the Tim Holtz grid dot stencils. The die set I'm going to be using for the sentiment is the Tim Holtz Sizzix Handwritten Journey, and I'm just going to be using the word explore, but you could use any die. And as far as the stencils go, you just want 2 stencils that can be layered with each other so that one is kind of a larger pattern and one has a smaller pattern, so that when you lay them on top of each other, the smaller pattern can be seen through the larger openings in the larger pattern. And then for the stamps, I'm going to be using the inspector. This guy here is going to be the focal point, and then I'll use some various other images from this set. I'm also going to be using the field notes, correspondence, going somewhere, and from Tim Holtz, and then 49 in Market's Creative Combos stamp set. All of these could be switched out. These particular stamps are just going to be kind of used to create additional elements for the card design and then on the background. So feel free to kind of go through your stash and pull out different kind of vintage, industrial, steampunk type style stamps, stencils, and dies to play with. Now, as far as the mediums that we're going to be working with, on the sample image I created that you see, I used Uncharted Mariner and Speckled Egg in Distress Oxides. And I think for the video here, though, I'm going to use Faded Jeans and Dusty Concord with Vintage Photo. So the example card on the preview image uses these 2 blues with Vintage Photo, but then I'm going to be playing with Faded Jeans, Dusty Concord, and Vintage Photo here in the video. You are also going to need some sort of distress ink, and I'm going to be using Scorched Timber. This is just going to be used to ink the edges of the die cuts in the background. We're also going to be playing with some texture paste, so I will be working with Distress Texture Paste Opaque. So just some sort of opaque matte white paste will work. And then we're also going to be playing with something that I don't normally use much, and that is distress paint. And we're going to be kind of using that in a slightly different way. You're going to need some sort of waterproof permanent ink for the stamping, so I would recommend archival ink or any kind of a permanent waterproof ink that you might have, and I'm going to be using black soot here. And then I have a variety of distress paints. Now these are just acrylic paints, so any acrylic paints would work. But the colors I'm going to be working with here are Ground Espresso, Pumice Stone, Gathered Twigs, Uncharted Mariner, Aged Mahogany, Spun Sugar, Picket Fence, Fossilized Amber, Vintage Photo, Lost Shadow, and then I have this metallic one here called Tarnished Brass. The Picket Fence and Gathered Twigs are being mixed together to create a light kind of skin tone color that I was going for. So obviously feel free to kind of mix and match to create whatever skin tone you might like. And then I'm using Spun Sugar to add to the skin tones as well. The other colors here are going to be used to color in the various images on the card, and like I said, I'll be sharing that with you here in the video. Now, when it comes to working with the paints, I'm going to be actually using just this detail water brush that I use to do like my watercoloring with distress inks or the watercolor pencils, but any kind of a paintbrush and some water will work for the technique. The paper I'm going to be using on all of the pieces for this card is distress watercolor cardstock. But feel free to use any sort of mixed media type paper, but you do want something that can handle a variety of mediums and water and paint. So I'm just going to start off with a piece of distress watercolor cardstock that I'm going to trim down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, just so that I can then mat it later onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of cardstock. Because I like to mat my background, so it's just a personal preference. You certainly don't need to do that. And you can make the background any, you can make this card any size that you like. All right, so here I'm just pulling out my sticky mat, and this just will help kind of hold the paper in place while I do some stencil work here with the texture paste. So I can just kind of position that stencil on there, and then everything stays in place and won't slide around on me. And I'm going to take the Distress Texture Paste and a palette knife here and get some of that onto the back side of the palette knife. And then I'm just going to apply that through the stencil here, kind of in this upper left-hand corner. I'm not going for full coverage across the whole background. I'm just kind of doing this upper corner, and then I'm going to move it over and do this other bottom right-hand corner here, kind of that same thing. Now this time when you do this, you're going to have to kind of hold up this part of the stencil so you don't lay it down in the area that you just applied it to. So I'm going to just kind of repeat that process here. Get that paste in this area of the stencil. And I'm just going to gently lift that off, and then we're going to put this in a tray of water or go ahead and clean it, and then we'll move on to the next step. And then as far as the paste goes, at this point, if you want to speed up the drying process with Distress Texture Paste, you can use your heat tool to dry this, or you can just set this to the side and let it dry. I'm always a little bit impatient, so I am going to go ahead and dry mine here with the heat tool. So then once the paste is dry, you're going to want to grab your Distress Oxide inks, and like I said, I'm going to be using Faded Jeans, Dusty Concord, and Vintage Photo. And if you want to still work on your sticky mat, you can. It's kind of up to you there. And I'm going to start off with the Dusty Concord. And I'm just going to use a blending brush to apply the ink over the stenciled area. And I'm just applying it here in this upper corner and then in this opposite lower corner. So just the opposite corners from each other. And then next I'm going to take the Faded Jeans and apply that here next to the Dusty Concord. I'm going to do the same thing here. And then just kind of blend that in a little bit with the dusty Concord that was next to it. And then finally, I'm going to take the vintage photo and I'm going to apply that kind of down through the center here. And again, just kind of letting it blend a little bit into the edge of the faded jeans section there. Now we're going to take the other stencil. So this is that smaller pattern one that we talked about. And so again, you just want something that's a little smaller pattern than the stencil you used with the paste. And now we're going to repeat that process with applying the oxide ink. You're going to apply the dusty Concord over the stencil and over the area where you had dusty Concord before. And because I'm working with one of Tim's stencils, which as we all know are smaller than our cards, I will move this later to kind of show you how you can shift this and continue this pattern across the rest of the background here. So I'm just gonna kind of do this lower part here. And then if you want to peel it up and just kind of see how it's turning out, if you feel like you need to add a little bit more ink to kind of darken it up and make that contrast show. I'm going to kind of go back over these two sections here. And there you go. So it's kind of cool. You just get that really neat effect there. Now I'm going to take this stencil off and just going to take a little cleanup cloth, spritz it with a little water, and I'm going to wipe off my stencil. And with this particular stencil, so I had it in this position over there, and I'm going to flip it over and line it back up with the pattern. So that works so good with this particular stencil. So then we'll just go back in and finish up the vintage photo area here, and then do the faded jeans, and then a little dusty Concord. And again, if you want to peel it up, just kind of make sure you have enough ink on there to really get the look you're going for. I'm going to maybe do a little bit more of the faded jeans here. Kind of blend those a little bit. And there we have it. So there is a look at where we are with the background for now. This is where we are now with the background. So we'll just kind of clean all this up. So now the next step for the background is I'm going to take my spray bottle and just going to add a little bit of some splatters over the background here, over the background. And we can just give that a dry with the heat tool. So just a light misting. So I'm kind of holding it back a little bit away from the paper when I did the spritzing, and just kind of quickly pull the trigger to just get a very light mist. And the farther away you are, the less water you're going to get on the paper. So if you are really close, you're going to get bigger or larger amount of water on there. So just kind of going for just a light splatter here, so you can kind of see how the ink, the oxide ink, reacted with the water, and it gives you those little white speckles all over. And if you'd like to add some larger droplets, you can do that by pulling the trigger a little bit more slowly, or you can unscrew the cap and just kind of tap on. That'll give you a little bit larger ones as well. So just a few options there. So if you want to, I'm going to maybe do a little bit more of the faded jeans here. And then a little dusty Concord. And then a little faded jeans. And then a little dusty Concord. And then a little faded jeans. 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 And then a little Go a little slower. Get some larger droplets you can. And then I'm just gonna finish drying this with my heat tool. And so here is where we are at this stage with the background. So as always, with any of the background techniques that I'm sharing here on my channel, you can always stop at any point along the way. It's really just a matter of, you know, enjoying the process and, you know, experimenting, playing with the layers. But again, if you don't want to continue and you love how this looks at this point, stop and skip to the next section where we start working on embellishing the card. So we are not done with the background. So now I'm going to take just a few little stamps here. So I'm just using this little script stamp here. So any little script stamp would work. And then I also have this ticket stamp here that I'm going to use. And I'm going to stamp those onto the background. If you want to use a stamping block for this, you can. It's really kind of up to you. I'm just going to use my hands with the stamp to do the image, to do the stamping. So I'm just going to stamp a little bit of it there. So I'm not pushing down on the whole stamp, just kind of bits and pieces of it, and then use a little bit of what's left there to stamp up there. And do that again over here. Now I'm going to do that same thing with this ticket image. And here, and then whatever's left on there on the upper end there, over onto that end. Oh yeah. Perfect. And then I think I'm also going to take this little received stamp here, and this one I am going to use a block with because it's just kind of small. I'm just going to stamp that kind of here and there a few places. Here we go. And so there is a look at the background now with the stamping that we've added. So you can tell it just adds another layer of interest to the background. And the final step with the background is I'm going to ink the edges here with a little bit of Scorched Timber Distress ink. And just going to kind of rub that around the edges here just to add a little bit of a, just kind of frames it out. Kind of adds a little bit of like a vignette effect to things. And if you do have any areas where some of that paste is kind of hanging over and that's making you crazy, you can just grab a pair of scissors and then flip it over from the back and then run your scissors along the edge of the paper and just kind of carefully trim off any of that overhanging paste if that's bugging you. You can also wipe it off while it's still wet, but for some reason I seem to always forget to do that. I'll go back and just rub this along here to darken that up a little bit more. So there is a look at our finished background. All right, so now we're going to work on the embellishments for the card. So I'm going to be using the inspector as my focal point image and this gauge image and the light bulb. And then I'm going to use a couple of these images from this stamp set. So I'm going to use this one here, and and then I'm also going to use this long stamp here. I'm working on a piece of watercolor cardstock that I'd cut down to 8.5 by 5.5 inches because I'm going to stamp the light bulb twice, and I just wanted to make sure I had enough paper for all of the pieces that I'm creating here. And then we're going to work in a stamping platform. I highly recommend a stamping platform for this technique because we're going to be stamping the image and then leaving it here in the platform and to do our coloring, and then we'll be re-stamping the image. So you don't have to get a perfect stamped image this first time. Just need to get the image stamped so that you kind of got an idea of where the design is. So you want to make sure you get a halfway decent image. There we go. I don't want to get too dark yet. Lightly, one more little layer there. That's better. So I can kind of see where I need to add color. Okay, so now we're going to take our paints. And as I said, I'm using quite a few different colors, so you can obviously use whatever colors you might have. That will work. And I'm going to start off with coloring his face. And I'm going to grab my little craft mat here. So I can kind of use this as a palette to mix colors on. Because for the skin tone, I'm going to use a little bit of white. And then a teeny bit of gathered twigs. I'm just going to mix those together here. And then we are going to color our image. So get a little bit of water going. That will help the paint blend and move. I'm just going to apply that to the image here. So we're kind of watercoloring, but we're using acrylic paints to do it. And don't worry if you can't see any of the stamped image. That's why we're working in the stamping platform. And if you are getting too much water, you can just kind of dab off onto your, like a paper towel or something, and just dab off any excess paint or water that you might have. And then the nice thing about a lot of these images from Tim, the way they're designed, kind of the artwork, where they've got all these shadows kind of built into them already. So I always like to kind of focus on getting the most amount of paint into the areas where there's all the cross hatching and the darkness, and then get a little less color in the areas that are open and don't have that texture on them already. Get down in here and get in the eye area here. And if you do get some where you don't want it, just clean off your brush real quick and then kind of wipe back over it and remove it before it dries. Because obviously we're working with acrylic paint, so once it's dry it's permanent. But while it's still wet, you do have some playtime with it, and that's why it's working so well here to do this coloring. All right, so there's that. And then if you want to add just a little bit of pink to his cheeks, you can. And obviously, like if you wanted this lighter, you could, you know, add more white. Or if you want it darker, you could add more brown. So just whatever kind of skin tone you desire, you can create. Kind of use a little bit, just tap. And that spun sugar just adds a little warmth to things, I think, in my opinion. So just kind of over the cheeks and that. Okay. So we're just going to kind of continue that process with the rest of the image here. So I'm going to use Uncharted Mariner for the hat and his jacket. And again, just kind of going with the darker color to the areas where there's more of a shadow on the image. And if you get out of the lines a little bit, don't worry. We're gonna be cutting this out, kind of fussy cutting around it, so there's no need to get too worried about going outside the lines. And you'll realize too that you need less paint than you think you do to do this. So it really doesn't take a lot of paint. And kind of flip it around here and work on the hat. And I just realized I'm coloring this in with Uncharted Mariner, but I think probably that will work okay on the background, but should have been faded jeans. Oh, I grabbed the wrong blue here for this, but gives you the idea of what we're doing here to create the embellishment for the card. So now we're going to add a little bit of aged mahogany. I'm just going to use that to color in parts of his hat decoration here. And I'm going to do a little ground espresso for his mustache and hair. Get that colored in here. Okay. And then come back. I'm going to add a little bit of spun sugar here. Give his lips a little color and maybe a little bit of the, that's too much. So, a little brown here. There we go. So give a little color to his lips. A little more spun sugar. There we go. And we're going to add some of that tarnished brass now. Oh wait, forgot his eyes. Let's go back to those. Some of that. Just gonna paint his eyes brown. Obviously you can make them whatever color you like. There we are. And then do some tarnished brass. And for this I'm gonna use on the buttons and kind of metal pieces here and there. Use this on his goggles, specifically here around the frame. This center piece here is really pretty black with shadows in that, so you're not going to need too much of it there. Then we'll add a little bit to this piece on his hat. And then, you know, if you wanted to do the band, I guess you could, but I'm going to leave it a little more white in color. And then lastly, I'm going to add a little bit of lost shadow, just to do a little bit of color to the white areas, just to kind of add a little bit of a shadow to them. So we'll do that on this band as well, and on his shirt. And then you just want to make sure this is dry before you do the next step. So then once you have all your coloring done, you are going to re-ink your stamp. And voila, your image kind of just pops a little bit more. Of course, my magnet's getting in the way there. So I usually stamp it a couple times just to get a really good, nice, dark image. And there you have it. So I'm going to just continue that process with these other images, and I'm just going to kind of talk you through what I'm doing for each of them, but I'm not going to show you because it'll just take forever. So I use a tarnished brass here on the edge of the dial, and then on the inside of the dial I used pumice stone, and then I used a little bit of aged mahogany to kind of add some detail to these sections here around the dial and these smaller dials. And then for this piece, I just painted it with some distress paint in pumice stone, and then the same thing here with this one. I just kind of painted the paper with a little bit of pumice stone like this, and just adding some water, get that paint moving around. Same thing here. Doesn't need to be perfect, and if that's too dark, you can always just kind of take a paper towel and just dab off a little bit of that, especially before it dries. Kind of add a little more water in there, dab that off, and then of course you're going to want to let that dry and dry completely before you move on. And then for the light bulb, I just used some fossilized amber to color that in, and then a little bit of and then I didn't add anything over this part here. I just stamped it again in black. And then again, once you have all of your coloring finished, you're just going to re-ink your stamps and re-stamp those images. So then once you have all of your pieces created and fussy cut, then it's just time to assemble a card. So you're just going to attach your background to your card front, and then use a variety of adhesives to adhere the various elements to the card. I used a little bit of foam adhesive behind the inspector and then behind the light bulbs just to pop those up a little bit. And then there you have it with the finished card. I hope you're as excited about Pretty Grunge Steampunk Vibes as I am. I cannot wait to get inky with you and create these bold layered vintage industrial cards together. I also hope you enjoyed today's video and that it got you inspired and excited to dive into the Pretty Grunge steampunk style. If you'd like to join me, you can purchase the class and register using the link in the description box below. Remember, if you can't make it to the live class, the replay will be available afterwards so you can watch at your own pace. I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay crafty, my friend.